Boom. Okay, guys. Hi. Let's get to James. We finished the section. We were doing the section 1 through 12, and we finished it. Although whoever was teaching before was obviously a slacker and didn't write anything down from this part on. But we started the book of James. Once again, the book of James is written to us by the brother of Jesus, not the apostle. We find in Acts that the Apostle James, the brother of John, was killed. So this particular book is one that is written to us from Jesus' brother. The once again background is once Paul and Barnabas were going on their first missionary, Paul's first missionary journey. He was going through Galatia. He goes back to Antioch where he was, and he heard some word about, there were some Jews in there that were messing with some of the Christians that had been converted there, telling them they needed to follow the law and become circumcised and stuff like that. So Paul and Barnabas traveled back down to Jerusalem and met with the Jerusalem church, which was comprised of Jews, Pharisees, Sadducees that have accepted Christ as their savior. And it was this famous Jerusalem church that James was the leader of. And it was in that space that he validated Paul's message. And when Paul left to go back up to Antioch to begin his second missionary journey, that's about the time that James, the brother of Jesus, wrote this book. It's probably the very first book you could probably see outside of the Gospels that was written first. We have these timelines here. You can look at those. I've got a little mini timeline here, but we can see that was written first. So after that visit, it sparked him to be able to talk to people, and maybe the conversations that he had with some of the other Jewish believers and the way some of the other Jews were acting throughout the area of Asia Minor, which is what this part is right here. We know that as Turkey, but back then it was Asia Minor. So maybe that's why he wrote this book. He wrote it as a Jewish believer to other Jewish believers. But the fact that he wrote it from a believer to a believer gives us the opportunity to be able to really embrace these words and help us to be able to face some of the pitfalls and obstacles and things that we have as believers as well. So in the beginning of James, he talked about count it all joy. In verse 2, he said, count it all joy when we fall into various trials. The first part that he talks about here is trials. These trials are tests of our integrity. And the integrity that he's testing is our faith. And we've been talking about that even in our church service when we're going through the armor of God, that these trials are the testing of our faith. And once again, if you're working out, my son, he's 9 years old. I don't know. He wants to have a six-pack. I don't know what his deal is. Just be 9. Play video games. I don't know. But he wants to work out and do all these things all the time. But he's finding that when he works out and the next day, he's sore and he can't figure out why. Well, guess why? The only way that you're going to be able to increase in your speed or in your strength is if you work out and take your muscles to the edge. And then the next day they build up stronger. And that's what that's all about. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. James calls for believers to be joyous in the testing of their faith, because on the other side of that test is strength in that faith that you have. The test is not designed to have you buckle under the weight of it. It is to get you to grow in it. That's what it's about. So here we see that we kind of talked about that. We're testing the faith. It produces something perfect. It makes you bigger, stronger. We need to make sure that we understand that these trials are something that always comes. They are inevitable. These trials will come. Why? Because we are in this fallen world and we are not always as faithful as we could be. And there's still, even the most faithful person still questions things from time to time. So there's always this continual perfecting of our faith. Here it says that, but let patience, verse 3, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, and that patience will have its perfect work. It'll make you stronger and better on the other side of it. In verse 5, he says, if you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who will give liberally and without reproach. A lot of times we don't get what's happening. And we don't know what the test is or why the test is or what's the parameters of the test or whatever that is. We don't even view it as a test. We just view it as a problem or an issue or an obstacle. We don't understand why. Well, if you want to know, just ask. It's not like it's a big secret. You know what I mean? God is doing this for a simple purpose, to strengthen that faith that you have. And the stronger that faith is, the more dedicated you are to God, the closer you draw to God, God will draw closer to you. And in that space, the devil will flee from you. That's what we've learned in Scripture. So in that space, we'll also be able to help other people too, which is kind of cool. We went all the way down. The last week, we talked about the rich and the poor. That was 9 through 12. 9 through 12, where it says, this can happen to rich people, to poor people. Verse 9 says, let lowly brothers glory in their exaltation, but let rich in their humiliation, because as a flower of the field will pass away, for no sooner as the sun rises with the burning heat, that it withers the grass, and its flowers fall. Putting your stake, when you have trials and struggles and stuff like that, putting your stake in human things, in our own strength, in our own knowledge, in our own self, ain't going to cut it. If we look to our own success to get us through the situation, it's not going to cut it, because we're only as strong as the last thing we've done, right? The last thing we've done defines our strength until the next thing comes. And if we buckle under that a little bit and become weak because of it, maybe that's because our faith needs to be renewed in that. And that's why he asks or tells us to go beyond that. Now, 12. I would say this as we move into this next section, which is going to be, let's see, and we're going to have a different name for it too. As we move into this next section, I want us to shift gears, and it's not a big shift, because right now what he's talking about is trials, and he's pulling back the curtain behind why trials happen. The trials are happening because it's trying to help you be more than what you are right now. And the only way to do that is through struggle. I remember that analogy of the butterfly. There was a kid that saw a butterfly coming out, and the butterfly was really struggling to get out of the cocoon that it had made. And the kid came and cut it open to let it out because he wanted to be merciful. But unfortunately, that struggle of coming out of that cocoon actually helps form a butterfly's body. And because he robbed that butterfly of that process, the butterfly died. So struggle does have its purpose, and it does have its reasoning. But we're talking about that last section that we talked about was about trials. The next section that we're going to talk about, where am I at? 13 through 18. That's where I'm at. 13 through 18. And we're going to talk about temptations. Okay? Temptations. All right, trials and temptations. Same thing? Good question, right? Can you have one without the other? Yeah. Maybe. It's an interesting question, right? And I think that's why we're shifting gears a little bit, because they're not so devoid of each other that they're compartmentalized, but they can be compartmentalized, I guess. And that's an important piece of the puzzle right here, right? Because a lot of people will try to, God says, if you don't understand, if you lack wisdom, ask for wisdom and I'll help you. But a lot of us try to build up that, sometimes us get that education, our biblical knowledge. We try to find, earthly success and stuff like that. And we drive ourselves, but unfortunately, sometimes even in that focus that we try to have, we can slip up. And we can be put in a position, whether it's at work or church or at home or whatever that is, that some kind of distraction or temptation can come our way. Temptations don't have limits, okay? Trials, we talked about what a trial is. A trial is what? It's something you were going through, right? It's the testing of your faith. It's a situation that you're actually engaged in, right? I'm in the middle of something. It's so I'll get stronger, so I'll be better on the other side of it, right? That's what a trial is. Temptation, on the other hand, has something different, okay? Temptations, just like trials, will come. They have no limit. They have no favoritism. They will come to anybody at any time. They will try to get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. Even if you're not in the middle of a trial, a temptation can start you down a path towards something. Maybe it's gossip. Maybe it's lying. Maybe it's stealing. Something simple can actually start a ball rolling to get you to where you are in this temptation, or then produce a trial or a test of your faith. All right? James explores the meaning of that word temptation by the testing of our endurance. See, what according to what we've just learned, trials produce patience. That endurance, it produces that in us. So it makes us stronger. When you're a runner and you want to run further, you run and you run, you build up your endurance, your strength, your stamina. So why? So you can run further than you did before that. And you continue to do that so you can run further and further and further. The same thing holds true for a trial. A trial puts you through something so that you can endure longer. You can endure more. You can handle more. That's why when you go through a trial, sometimes you look at somebody else's, somebody else tells you, man, I'm going through this. And you look at it and go, that's nothing. Holy cow. That's because our endurance is beyond where they are, right? But then sometimes we look at somebody's trial and we go, whoa, I'm glad that ain't me. You know what I mean? That's because your endurance ain't, their endurance is so much further than yours that you can't recognize that being in that space, because that's not where you're at. God wouldn't put you in that space, because if he did put you in that space, you would definitely buckle. And that's not the point. The point is to produce patience or endurance and those types of things, right? So as we continue on in this study, we want to look at this. And James kind of now shifts gears, and he kind of looks at the inner workings of temptation. He talked about kind of the reason for trials and kind of pulled back the curtain so we could see what trials were. But now he kind of looks at temptation a little bit deeper, and he looks at it not like a psychologist would look at it, but more like a physician would look at it. Like, this is the illness, this is the cause, this is the solution, kind of a thing, right? So that's why he's doing this for us. And once again, we're going to, as we go through this section, we're going to see a little bit of, once again, James is a Jew writing to other Jews, but he's a believer writing to other believers. And as we go through this, we're going to see a little bit of his Jewish heritage coming out and how he explains some things to other Jews. And that's an important piece for us, because I told you when we started this that this will give us a good opportunity for us to look apples to apples at this, because we'll be able to see through James's Jewish eyes at his Jewish audience, right? But he's also a believer who's talking to other believers, so we can gain something from it as long as we're taking the perspective in the right way. So let's do that here. James begins, he describes temptation, and then he moves on to how to get over that, or how to be able to do that. Did I put 18? Oh, I did. Good. See, I'm all out of that. Let's back up to 12 here. And we'll go through we're going to go through verse 13, but I want to back up to 12 here because I want to kind of set the stage. Remember, he said, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has approved, or when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Here we see that if you endure and you're able to get through this temptation, all right, not the trial, the temptation, that's a good on you kind of a thing. That's a good attaboy. And in that, God will reward that for you. All right. And as we continue on, I want to look at 13 here. Well, I want to look at 13 through, 18, but we're not going to get that far. Let's just start at 13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. Let's pause right there. Here in 12, as we kind of talked about that in the last section, but now we're talking about it as well in this section because he's shifting gears to temptation. He says, let no one say that God is tempting us. In the previous section, we see that God was utilizing trials to help us, right? He's utilizing trials to help us. But now he's shifting gears to temptations, okay? And this is a very interesting point and an interesting separation and an interesting perspective that we have to have when we're looking at Scripture here. And James wants his fellow believers to understand that there's some really important things about temptation. There's like 4 different things. We're not going to get through all 4, but we'll start with the first one. And that the first thing that he tells us is the same thing he kind of tells us about trials. Trials are always around. Temptations are always around too. All right? Trials is an actual thing that we're engaged in, right? But a temptation is something a little bit less than that, so to speak, right? If you were going to try to define, I kind of told you what a trial is, but if you were trying to define what a temptation is, what do you think that might look like? What do you think that might be? Temptation.
Something that attracts you one way or the other from the path of God.
Okay, not bad. I like that. Anybody else? Temptation. So that's actually a pretty good one right there. Here we see that he starts off by saying that if we read through this, verse 13, he's saying, let no one say when he is tempted. That little part that says when he is tempted is important. He didn't say if, right? It said when. That's an important piece of the puzzle. When we're tempted. So that means that temptations are there, and they will always be there. Temptations may not be the trial itself, but a temptation can set you on a path different or diverged from where God is sending you down, right? So it says here, very importantly, when you fall into a temptation or when a temptation presents itself, all right? That's a big piece of the puzzle. We got to remember that temptations are inevitable, all right? The testing of our faith is through those trials, but temptation is something that can come along and do the same thing. Second thing he wants to point out here, and this is also an important piece of the puzzle here in verse 13, if I can keep my finger there so I know where I'm at, is that temptation is never prompted by God. Okay? It says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. All right? Here, a small but important detail appears in the Greek text, and that's what I want to share with you. I tell you I'm a nerd all the time and all that kind of stuff, so that's why we're going through this. Here, if you look at, and this is hopefully I'll be able to explain this to you. It says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. All right? It's an interesting structure in the Greek if you read this saying right here, that I am tempted by God. That word by is an interesting word. It's apo. And it if you were to use, if we were to read the sentence kind of in the English like we're doing now, and it didn't have a supporting Greek text for translating, if we were to look at this, the word by has a different connotation. All right. I got to put my finger there so I remember right there. If you were looking, he had some options, just like we have options in English, to use different words to communicate things, right? And he could have used a different form of the word by. He could have used hupo, which is it's a preposition that that facilitates the user of a thing or the presenter of a thing. If you look in Matthew 4, when Jesus was tempted, right? When Jesus was tempted, Satan tried to tempt him by offering him things, by hupo, by showing him different things. There's different parts of that in there. It's just he is the person that's facilitating giving it to you. We all kind of know what the word by means, right? But instead of using hupo, which is the same word as by, like a normal by that we would use in English.
The word you're trying to find is the agent.
Oh yeah. There you go. Okay, good. So the agent hupa is the way that you would communicate. This is done by so and so. It's the facilitator of that, or something like that. So when we read this in English, it's a little deceiving. Semi, because if you read this, it says, "Let no one say when I am tempted by God." Or, we would normally think if we were tempted, we'd be tempted by Satan, right? But because we're looking at this, we're thinking to ourselves that God could be the person that tempts us, all right? Just like Earl had said a little bit ago, sometimes bad things happen to us, and we ask that question, why? Did God do this? Here it's stating that don't say that you are tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. That word by, the apo, it means the point of origin, or the other one is indirectly involving a temptation. Well, this one, the apo, is a preposition that refers to the origin of something. All right, the origin of something. Temptation to sin doesn't have its ultimate origin in God. So here, the reason why this is an important piece that I think is interesting is because if you have it in the English, I am tempted by God, you're thinking God's thinking up these bad things to do to me, right? Why did God allow these things? Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Why is God doing this? Why is he doing this? Yeah, that's the type of thing. But here, this word by means the point of origin. That means that God is sitting there thinking up all these wonderful things to do to you that's going to be so terrible. That's what that word apo means. It means a point of origin. It's not just the word by, the hupa, is just the facilitator of something. This apo means at the point of origin. So instead of saying, this would be like saying, I am tempted through the conniving spirit of God. He's the one that thought up all these things. He's the one that's doing all these things. He's the one that's imposing on this. From. I'm coming from God, as he is the one that originates it, and he's the one cooking it up to do to you from, right? So as you do that, it says, I am tempted by God. I am tempted from God. That is not the case. It follows it up by saying, for God cannot be tempted by evil, evil being the origination, nor does he himself tempt anyone. When we looked at trials, the idea was given to us that God uses trials to do what? To strengthen our faith, right? Does he originate those trials? Does he make that happen to you? No. But he allows that trial to be there so that he can help develop you? Does he protect you? Yeah.
I think the difference between temptation and trial is what it says here. Temptation comes from our flesh.
We're about to get right there. Yeah, for sure.
The trials comes from God. Trials, if we look at Job and Abraham, it comes from God because God has already prepared them to pass the trial that he will give them.
Right.
God already knew my servant Job, have you looked on my servant Job, and
Right.
God knew that he has already prepared Job to pass the trial.
Yeah.
And God already knew that Abraham would sacrifice his son or would attempt to do that.
Right.
So God, trials come from God because God knows that he has already prepared us to pass the trial.
Yeah, he allows the facilitation of that trial to happen. But when it comes to a temptation, and we'll see as we look further into the construction of this, sadly we're out of time. When we look into the construction of this a little bit more, you're going to see that people automatically assume that this temptation came from God because God let a trial happen to me. So obviously he must be tempting me to go somewhere else. Here it's saying that the origination of that evil, the origination of that temptation did not come from God. And as TJ said, TJ, right? JT, sorry, bad. James Taylor, gotcha, James, that'll help me. As he said, we're going to get into that as we move further through this. But what we're going to find out is temptation is this outside thing also, but it is tailor-made to bring us away from where we are. It is something that originates here, not with anything else. The temptation itself isn't even sin. It's the option to do. If you had an option to go A or B, it's the option B. All right. The actual problem isn't in the temptation. It isn't even in the trial or the temptation, I should say, and the option of doing something bad. The problem is here because that option B, wouldn't even bother us if we were so committed down option A. If we were following after God, we were drawing closer to God, he was drawing closer to us. This thing that's going on over here, it's tailor-made for me to try and get me to go, huh? But I don't have to do that because I have the option. The origination, we assume, is from God. Of course, it's from God. It can't be from me. It's got to be from some outside source, right? No. People say that. Why is God doing this to me? God ain't doing jack to you. It is here that we see that the origination of this temptation comes from within us. Some kind of lust, some kind of desire that we have, and it pulls us towards something that we don't want to do. And when that happens enough, we're going to see what James kind of warns us about. And that'll kind of get into a little bit of the kind of the Hebrew, kind of the Jewish kind of traditions and things like that. So anyway.
It's from our own fleshly desires in one form or another.
Sure.
It's something that we at one point in our life said, oh, wouldn't I do this? Or I'd like to have that. It's from our own desires.
Yeah.
That we're tempted.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's the thing. A trial may be there and may be allowed to happen in our lives, but that's for the development of our faith. Just because, if you want to get stronger, you got to push your muscles. You got to get stronger in your faith. You got to push your faith. But a temptation, that's different. Okay, let's pray. We're out of time. Sorry, let's go. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity that we had to look at this. Dear Lord, help us to understand these differences. Dear Lord, as we continue this study, help us to open our hearts and minds to you, understanding that the origination of the ability to sin is our choice and our choice alone. You are there. You provide us with strength and wisdom and power. You provide us with the things that we need to be able to overcome the trial that we may be in, or to be able to overcome the temptation that's presented to us. But we must understand that those temptations are tailor-made for us. They're intended to pull us away from you. So what do? We need to stay strong. We need to stay faithful. We need to get our eyes focused upon you, and we'll be able to move beyond where we are, closer to you, and be able to be stronger in our faith. Dear Lord, help us to remember these things as we go through our days, that these are things that you have provided for us, and help us with. James is kind of a no-nonsense guy, and as he teaches us this, help us to truly embrace it in our daily lives. Thank you so much for this time. Help us open our hearts and minds to you in our church service, and we ask it in Jesus' precious name. Amen.